They said it so casually that at first I thought I misheard them. Worthless. Like it was a fact, not an opinion. Like it explained everything about me. I was sitting at the long dining table in my in-laws' house, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had already gone cold. The room smelled like polished wood and expensive perfume. This was the house where I had spent the last 6 years trying to belong, and that evening I realized how little they thought of me. My name is Sarah. I was 32 at the time, married to Daniel, the oldest son in a family that cared deeply about appearances. They were successful, respected, and very clear about who mattered and who didn't. I came from a quieter background. My parents were teachers. We didn't have much, but we had stability, warmth, and values. Daniel used to say that was what he loved about me. In the beginning, he defended me. At least, that's what I believed. That night, the conversation started like it always did. His mother was talking about investments, his father was scrolling through something on his tablet, his younger sister, Emily, was complaining about how hard it was to manage people at her new job. Then his mother looked at me and smiled in that tight way she always did. "You know," she said, "Daniel really carries everything on his shoulders." I nodded politely. "He works very hard." She tilted her head. "Yes, it must be comforting for him knowing he doesn't have to worry about you contributing much." The table went quiet. Daniel shifted in his chair but said nothing. Emily let out a small laugh. "She means financially," Emily added. "No offense, some people just don't have assets." I felt heat rush to my face. "I have a job," I said softly. "I worked as an operations coordinator for a mid-sized logistics firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well." His father finally looked up. "A job is not the same as value," he said. "Security comes from ownership." Then came the word. "Honestly," Emily said, shrugging, "if something happened to Daniel, what would you even have? Nothing. That's the problem. You're, well, kind of worthless on paper." Worthless. Daniel didn't stop her. He stared at the table like it wasn't happening. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. I excused myself, went to the guest bathroom, and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the tub and tried to breathe. I told myself they were just words. I told myself I didn't need their approval. But that wasn't the first time they'd said things like that. It was just the first time they said it so clearly. Over the years, the comments piled up. Little jokes about how Daniel married down, remarks about how my clothes were practical, questions about whether I planned to do anything more with my career. Every holiday, every dinner, every gathering came with reminders that I was tolerated, not respected. Daniel used to squeeze my hand under the table. Later, he stopped doing even that. At home, things weren't much better. He'd come back late, tired, distracted. When I talked about work, he'd nod without really listening. When I suggested we plan something together, he'd say, "Let's talk about it later." Later never came. One night, a few weeks after that dinner, I finally said it out loud. "Do you think I'm worthless?" He looked surprised. "Why would you ask that?" "Because your family says it, and you never say anything." He sighed. "They're just blunt. You know how they are." "That's not an answer." He rubbed his face. "Look, they value success. It's not personal." "It feels personal." He didn't argue with that. He just went quiet. That was when I started noticing the cracks more clearly, the way he avoided conversations about money, the way he brushed off my ideas, the way he spoke about our future like it was something he was building alone. Then came the email. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work. The subject line was simple: Asset Review, Confidential. At first, I thought it was spam, but the sender's name caught my attention. It was from a legal firm I recognized. Daniel's family used them for almost everything. I didn't open it right away. Something in my chest tightened. When I finally did, my hands started to shake. The email wasn't meant for me. It was clearly addressed to Daniel. It outlined a planned restructuring of family assets, trusts, properties, shares, and one line stood out like it was glowing. In the event of divorce, ensure spousal claims are limited. current spouse has no registered ownership in family or personal holdings. No registered ownership? I reread it again and again. They were planning, not just for money, for life without me. That night, Daniel admitted it. They just want to protect what's theirs, he said. It doesn't mean anything is happening. But you're okay with them treating me like I don't exist? He didn't answer, and in that silence, something inside me shifted. I started thinking about everything I'd kept quiet, everything I'd built quietly without telling anyone. The savings I managed, the decisions I made, the documents I signed years ago before I even met Daniel. They thought I owned nothing, and for the first time I realized how dangerous that assumption was. After that email, I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped asking Daniel to understand. Instead, I started paying attention, real attention. I noticed how often his parents talked about preparing for the future, how Emily bragged about what she'd inherit, how Daniel repeated their words without even realizing it. He talked about his plans, his investments, his risks. I was never part of the picture. At night, while he slept, I lay awake and replayed everything in my head, not just the insults, the years, the small decisions I'd made that no one thought mattered. I remembered my first job out of college. I was 22 and terrified. My father had sat me down and said, "Never rely on anyone else for your security, not because people are bad, but because life is unpredictable." He taught me how to save, how to read contracts, how to think long-term. When my grandmother passed away, she left me something modest but meaningful, a piece of land on the edge of a growing industrial area. Everyone told me to sell it. I didn't. I leased it instead, quietly. I reinvested the income. I never talked about it because I didn't want opinions or pressure. Later, I started consulting on the side. Process improvement, efficiency. I was good at it, better than I ever admitted. The extra income went straight into accounts in my name, accounts no one else had access to. Even after I married Daniel, I kept those things separate, not out of distrust, out of habit, out of instinct. They never asked, so I never told. As the weeks passed, the tension at home grew. Daniel became more distant. One evening, he said, "My parents think it might be good if we signed a post-nuptial agreement." I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. "So they're planning for when you leave me," I said. "It's just paperwork. If there's nothing to worry about, why does it matter?" I looked at him carefully. "Do you want it?" He hesitated. "I just don't want conflict." That was when I understood. He wasn't choosing me. He was choosing comfort, and I was expected to be grateful for whatever space they allowed me to occupy. I didn't say no. I told him I'd think about it. That night, I cried quietly in the shower, not because I was scared of losing him, but because I realized how small I'd allowed myself to become in this marriage. I'd shrunk to fit into a life where my worth was measured by what others could see. The betrayal wasn't just theirs, it was his silence, his willingness to let them erase me. A few days later, I met with my lawyer, alone. I laid everything out on the table, every document, every account, every lease. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back and smiled. "They have no idea," she said. "No," I replied. "They don't." That was the moment the plan started to form. Not revenge in the way people imagine. No shouting, no scenes. Just clarity, truth, and boundaries. The next family dinner was scheduled for Daniel's birthday. His parents insisted on hosting. I almost didn't go, but then I realized something. I was done hiding. The evening started politely. Gifts were exchanged, toasts were made. His father gave a speech about legacy, about building something that lasts. He looked at Daniel with pride. "And of course," he added, glancing at me, It's important to know who you can rely on when it comes to responsibility." Emily smirked. "Some people are just along for the ride." I set my fork down gently. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "Actually," I said, "I've been meaning to clear something up." Everyone turned to me. Daniel looked confused. "You've all been very open about what you think I contribute, so I thought it was time I shared what I actually own." The room went still. Emily laughed. "This should be good." I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table, then another and another. Deeds, contracts, statements. I didn't push them toward anyone, I just let them sit there. "I own 3 commercial leases," I said calmly, "one of which is under long-term contract with a logistics hub. I also hold majority shares in a small but growing consultancy, and I have personal savings that don't rely on anyone else's name." Daniel stared at me. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the life I built," I said, meeting his eyes, quietly. His father picked up one of the folders. His expression changed as he skimmed the first page. His mother leaned closer. Emily stopped smiling. "This can't be right," she said. "It is," I replied, "and it's all been reviewed, legally, thoroughly." The silence stretched. I could feel years of assumptions collapsing in that moment. Daniel finally spoke. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I looked at him and felt something strange. Relief. "You never asked, and you never defended me when it mattered." No one had anything to say to that. The aftermath wasn't loud. It was colder than that. His parents suddenly wanted to talk, to understand. His mother asked careful questions. His father cleared his throat more than usual. Emily avoided my eyes. Daniel was different too. He oscillated between shock and resentment. "You made me look foolish," he said one night. "I told the truth," I replied. "You just weren't prepared for it." We signed the postnuptial agreement, not the one his parents suggested, the one my lawyer drafted. Clear, balanced, fair. It acknowledged what each of us owned, separately. A month later, I moved out. It wasn't dramatic. I packed my things while Daniel was at work. I left a note, not angry, just honest. I needed space and clarity, things I couldn't find in that house. The divorce took time, but it was civil. His parents tried to intervene, to negotiate, to regain some sense of control, but there was nothing left for them to take. They had underestimated me, and the law doesn't care about pride. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork, it was letting go of the version of myself who believed that being quiet was the same as being kind, that keeping peace meant accepting disrespect. When everything was finalized, I sat alone in my new apartment. It was smaller than the house I'd left, but it felt like mine in a way that place never had. I made tea and stood by the window, watching the city move. For the first time in years, I felt light. They had called me worthless because they couldn't see my value, because I didn't perform it, I didn't announce it, I didn't decorate myself with it. But worth isn't always loud. I still don't talk much about what I own, not because I'm hiding, but because I don't need to prove anything anymore. The people who matter don't ask, and the ones who judge don't deserve the explanation. If there's one thing I learned, it's this: never confuse silence with emptiness, and never let someone else define your worth just because they don't understand your strength. I know exactly what I own now: my work, my future, and myself.